Saints fans, to another instalment of Saints TVW. This week we are reviewing the girls' outing against the Gold Coast Suns up at Great Barrier Reef Stadium in Mackay. As I just look to my notes here for the official scores, unfortunately it was our second loss for the season, second loss on the trot, where Gold Coast scored 5 goals 12-42 to our 4 goals 4-28. While there was plenty to like about our outing again, I think there's some areas where hopefully internally at the club there'll be some solid review and perhaps some points of review that I suppose, in my very comfortable armchair, consider as we go into next week. So for anyone who watched the game, they would know, but the conditions were quite challenging at times. It was very windy up at Mackay, and there was a piece of play again in the first quarter that saw a kick across the goal square where the ball really hung in the air, and it gave you a really clear insight into the difficulty of the game itself, and just how tricky those conditions would have been in terms of pinpointing kicks and really hitting targets. So there's that. We kicked the first goal of the match through Caitlin Greiser, the G-Train, but after that, really what told the story for me was Gold Coast's pressure and their decision making for the remainder of the match. That's what really separated us from them for the whole game. So I know that our pressure game is something that we've prided ourselves on so far this season, but we were really matched by Gold Coast in this instance. I suppose it was a bit disappointing from our perspective. Gold Coast were absolutely demolished by Brisbane the previous week. Gold Coast last week only scored 1 goal 3. I know they went down by 73 points, but 1 goal 3 for the entire match, I think went to show that they were ripe for the taking if our pressure game was on. And our pressure, which has been a hallmark of our game so far this year, while it was there, perhaps the consistency in which it appeared was perhaps a little bit off. But we were, of course, looking to bounce back against Naarm in the first of the Indigenous weeks in the AFLW. As I reported last week, after quarter time where we really got blown out of the water, we managed to come back really, and it was the way that we played the game last week which really told the tale for us. We kept Naarm goalless after quarter time, but it was our ball movement again and our pressure last week that really was very promising, and that's what I was hoping to see replicated this week. And given Gold Coast's form last week, I was thinking if they did bounce back, I thought we had the pressure around the ground and the players who showed really promising ball movement to match them. But on the form of both sides, I thought we were in for putting in a big showing and perhaps a win on the road, but it wasn't to be this time. Before we get into the specifics of the match, I suppose just a little bit of a gripe from me, just as a spectator. We know that the AFLW is an emerging competition, and you only need to look to the social media outlets, and in fact don't look to the social media outlets because they're an absolute pit for the dregs of the internet and their comments, ignorant comments. But the little gripe that I had was on the TV broadcast, the acknowledgement of country from Melanie Kemp and the didgeridoo played by Lyndon Francis, which eventually, once the issues were sorted, were heard quite audibly. The welcome to country in particular wasn't synced with the broadcast. And in fact, you sort of overheard, I want to say at the beginning, it was David Guetta's latest tune over the top of Melanie Kemp. She was giving the welcome to country, which really left quite a sour taste in my mouth, particularly, looking aside from the fact that this is the second of the Indigenous weeks for the AFLW competition. Personally, I expected a better broadcast from the AFL, and whether that's Fox Footy's issue, I don't know. I suppose if we're trying to make strides in this competition and really sell it as a professional product, which it is for the most part, something like that, you just would never see that in the men's game. It would just be something that was absolutely ironed out to a T. So that was quite disappointing from my front, watching on the couch at home. Again, I just want to acknowledge the jumper designed by Bailey Misford, who designed our jumper that we wore this week and last week. She is a proud Kirari and Pig Woorong woman, and her Guernsey is really wonderful. There's a real insightful article written about the jumper itself from the St Kilda website in the AFLW hub, so I do recommend that you jump on and have a look and read into the story behind the design of our Guernsey. We headed into the match with two debutants and one player who came back in after a stint on the sidelines after her debut season in 2021. So that was Simone Nolder, and we saw Deanna Jolliffe come in for both of their debuts, and also Lucy Burke, who came in after a stint on the sidelines from her debut season in 2021. So it was fantastic to see those girls come in and to get given their opportunity, unfortunately at the expense of Beck Ott with a calf injury, Molly McDonald with concussion, and then of course Clara Fitzpatrick, who was on personal leave. So it was remarked on the commentary, and it's true. I mean, at the moment we have a fit side, and we've been really battered by injuries so far this season. So the girls who came in, it was fantastic to see them go well in their debut, but unfortunately weren't able to get the chocolates this time around. Kate Shearlaw has been a prolific goal kicker for us in recent weeks, and as of the most recent round was leading the goal kicking table. But I wanted to point out Caitlin Greiser. She had a shot at goal that, if she hasn't won goal of the year already from the match against Hawthorn, my gosh, this one, had it gone through, it would have been close. So she proves herself quite dangerous around goal again. Voted Saner of the round, and again, I think I've mentioned her in every video so far this year, but Bianca Jacobson she is an absolute pillar down back and really is strong and a steadying presence for us, a fantastic intercept marker, and ended up with 19 touches, 16 kicks, 3 handballs, which was absolutely fantastic. Again, I don't want to harp on the gripes. I'm not about the negatives if I can avoid them, really. But again, just on a production front, Jack Heverin, who was one of the lead commentators, again, who I've listened to for a long time on SEN, and really is great at the commentary. Hannah Priest, who's our skipper, I think on 2 different occasions he called her Jess Priest and Rachel Priest. A slip of the tongue, you can look past it, okay, but really, she's our skipper. There are a lot of names to remember, sure thing, but really, if you're not sure, stick with the surname, please, Jack, because otherwise it's a little bit embarrassing for any player. But I think I suppose it just devalues things a little bit further in the competition. But our fearless skipper, she came up with 17 touches and 3 tackles and really played well off of the half-back line, often running through the midfield and driving the ball forward, which is great. We had some other admirable games from Hannah Stewart, who had 12 touches, 5 tackles. Patricios, again, still finding her feet, coming back into AFLW and still trying to, get back to being match fit and getting to the level. She had 14 touches and 4 tackles. A smile was put on the face of every St Kilda player when every St Kilda supporter, and I'm sure as well the players, when Alice Burke debuted for St Kilda last year. Nathan Burke, her father, is an absolute champion of the club, and to see her start to play her game in a similar way to her father is absolutely fantastic. She finished up with 12 touches and 2 tackles, but I think the making of her game really was summed up. It was in the first quarter for me, and she put in this massive defensive effort where she ended up leaving her player, which is a risk, but ended up really impacting the contest, which was brilliant. So long may Alice Burke continue to develop her form. A couple of players I'd really like to point out in terms of their pressure acts and the way that we like to play the game. Rosie Dillon, she had 8 touches and 7 tackles, which really, if we're looking to be a hard pressure-based team, is brilliant. I want to point out as well Nicola Stevens and Tiny White, very similar to Rosie Dillon in that they had 5 touches and 8 touches respectively, but within that had 6 and 5 tackles respectively. So Nicola Stevens, 5 touches, 6 tackles, Tiny White, 8 touches, 5 tackles. So really, though they weren't up there in the possession count, the impact that they had on the game in terms of their influence and their pressure game was brilliant. A standout for me as well was Ella Friend. Even though she only finished up with 7 touches and 2 tackles, I don't think it really tells her story for the day. She was really impactful and her possessions were in really important parts of the ground, and she made meaning out of them, if it were. She really drove the ball forward and didn't waste any of those 7 possessions, which was fantastic. If we look at the game as a whole, Gold Coast had scored one goal 5 at quarter time, and at quarter time as well, the handball receive count, I think, again, this was pointed out of the commentary, I think really told the tale. Gold Coast were 20-4 at quarter time, and overall for the match there was 102 handballs to our 44. So that stat tells me that Gold Coast really were committed and were very successful in their game, where they drove the ball forward and were able to move the ball quickly. And really that the disposal count, the handball count as mentioned, and contested possessions, Gold Coast were really ahead of us. So those three really important stats for me tell us that while we tried to play our game, we tried to get it going, we really just didn't get across the line this week. Even though, we were even in clearances, we were even, and this is where I suppose it's a little bit frustrating as a supporter, we were even in the inside 50s and we were even in the marks inside 50s. We know that we've got a tall, dangerous forward line. We know that we've got players like Sheila and Greiser and others who really are very tall timber down there. And I suppose it's disappointing, as remarked last week, that we matched the team that we were playing in terms of driving inside forward 50 and getting possession inside forward 50, but we just weren't able to capitalise. And as we all know, whether it's the men's or the women's game, you've got to take your chances when you go forward. And unfortunately, we weren't able to do that this week. I suppose there could be criticism come for us in that the spread of our team now is that of quite mature players, those who have played a solid amount of footy at the level. We're talking like Nicola Stevens on 50 games, Erin McKinnon on 41, Kate Sheila on 34, Nat Exton on 34 as well as a handful, perhaps more than a handful, like Gutteridge, Greiser, Kelly, White and Priest, who make up that middle band on like 20 plus games. We also have a really good crop of talented kids coming through. So I suppose there could be some criticism from the outside in terms of the more experienced heads, and even those who are emerging as experienced heads, to perhaps show a little bit more leadership in that area, and I suppose play their role to a higher level. Look, I think that's probably a little bit rough. Again, watching the game, the way that we moved the ball, it wasn't that it was poor. I just think Gold Coast were hungrier than us on the day and really were more effective and took advantage of the shots they had in front of goal. So really, that's my wrap for the match this week. We're showing a lot of promise, but I would like to see us perhaps try and stem some bleeding when it happens to us in matches a little bit more clearly and a little bit more readily, rather than we are doing, hopefully, to keep that margin a little bit closer, because the scoreline itself, we came back in the second half, particularly in the last quarter. Perhaps if we were closer in terms of the margin, the result might have been a little bit differently, but it wasn't to be this time. Turning towards next week, we are playing Geelong down at the Cattery on Thursday, the 22nd of September. That match starts at 5 p.m. So, I'm planning on heading to that game. I think given that it's school holidays, given that there'll be a massive buzz around the Cattery, given that their men's side is playing in the Granny on the weekend, I think it would be a fantastic opportunity for as many Saints fans as possible to head down the highway and enjoy what is looking like to be pretty decent weather. Like I said, an earlier start, school holidays, to watch some footy action prior to the big dance on Saturday for the men's game. So I encourage everyone to, if you can, get down there or to tune in to what's likely to be a hard-fought contest against the Cats. I'm sure they'll want to put in a good showing as a good omen for their men's side on the weekend. Again, I just want to say thank you to the audience for having a look at this weekly instalment. It's something we're still trying to get off the ground, and I'm appreciative to Jake and the Saints TV crew for giving me a chance to share my thoughts on the AFLW game. So please continue to like the video. If you are enjoying what you're seeing, please feel free to share it, to subscribe to the channel. I'm really welcome any sort of input or comments or feedback that you might have about what you want to see from this podcast or from this instalment, what you don't want to see, what you want to see less of as well. So please don't hesitate. Any feedback's good feedback, so please don't hesitate to see it through. But I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to wish the girls all the best on Thursday for their contest against the Cats. Hopefully we were able to come back to Melbourne, come up the highway with the chocolates and set ourselves up for what is an excellent second half of the season. But until then, thanks for listening. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and go the Saints.